Greetings, Internet. This is Danni Danger, and I am talking to the fabulous Nathan Edmondson, comic book writer, actor. How you doing, Nathan?
Good, thanks.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we'll dive right into it. I have been reading so much this week in preparation for this interview, and it all comes back to the first book I wanted to talk to you about. I'm really excited. Where is Jake Ellis was the first book that I read that you wrote. And I always come back to it because, and I just actually had you re-sign my #1 copy. I had it signed 5 years ago when I wasn't there, and I got it signed for a second time when I was there. Jake Ellis, for those of you who haven't read it, is an espionage spy book, but it's not your typical espionage spy book. Being a really huge, and we talked about this a little bit when we met, you're a huge fan of the spy genre. How did you go about coming up with such a fresh take on the subject?
I have no idea. I mean, that and any other espionage book that I approach, something about it feels pretty natural. The trick to me is in finding different ways to approach stories that exist in a similar space. And with Jake Ellis, I don't really remember a lot of, I kind of remember where some of the idea came from, but as far as constructing the story, I don't remember struggling with it that much. I think it came out pretty naturally. So, and I don't know why that is, if it was from watching a number of different things, or if I just sort of, that story, I guess any story, but in a special way, this one, it's all about the character, and so sort of creating these characters and following them. And I think I understood John and Jake, the lead character or characters, early on so well that it didn't take a lot of figuring out as I went along.
Did the idea just come to you? The idea of having Jake sort of as this subconscious extension of John, did that idea just come to you? Did it develop over time? Did you have these two characters and want to merge them somehow? Or did it just pop into your head as all one sort of package deal, the two of them?
Well, it came about, the whole idea, there was a street sign in Augusta, Georgia. It's Jake Ellis Lane. And I've said this a number of times before, but I just thought it was a cool character name, and I was driving, and it was about a 2-hour drive, and I passed the street, and then about 2 hours, by the end of the drive, 2 hours later, I had pretty much the whole story worked out in my head. So it was just one of those sort of flash in the pan or lightning in a bottle or whatever you're going to say. It was one of those moments where you just sort of, I saw it and didn't really know what it was, and then and the story, I guess I was just primed to have the story ready. But of course it's like, well, was the inspiration really that quick, or had I been thinking about elements of it even subconsciously for months and months? The truth is probably something like that.
So someone in Augusta, Georgia has surely offered to steal the street sign for you, right? I can hope.
No, the local paper, when we announced the film deal, they interviewed me and talked about it, and that led to getting some phone calls from people who thought I would want to hear their stories about living on Jake Ellis Lane, or time they got drunk on the street and threw bottles at somebody, or whatever their story they were trying to email me or call me and tell me about, which it was hard to tell them. It has nothing to do with the street. It's just the name.
Just the name.
For the character. But no, nobody's offered to steal the street sign. And if I end up with it, I probably won't tell anybody, because that would be a crime. So.
That would be a crime.
Right.
So one of the things that I've noticed that translates all the way through your body of work is you use a lot of different languages. Why is it so important for you to include so many different languages and so many different stories, and how do you choose, if it's not based on location of where the characters are, how do you choose which languages that you're going to put in? It seems very conscious.
Well, it really depends on the story, but for example, in the activity, we used a lot of foreign language moments. You know what? I need to be right back. Can you give me 30 seconds? Sorry.
Yes.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. If you haven't read any of Where is Jake Ellis, you absolutely should. This was a book that, 5 years ago I picked up on a whim. It was just, it was when I very first started reading comics, so this was probably my first spy espionage themed comic that I checked out, and it's, it sort of opens up with a young man who is being guided by this invisible force named Jake Ellis, this guy who's just telling him how to escape these situations and keeping an eye out for him. And it's a really great book, and if you haven't read it, you should. And I'm judging you a little bit.
Sorry about that. Through the door, I'm watching my toddler because because I'm, for some reason, my wife is not here, and I don't know, she's late, and so anyway, I'm watching her through, and she was very content, and then she started to have a meltdown because she ran out of crackers.
Oh no! I hate it when I run out of crackers.
That's why I keep looking off this way, and also watching through the window to make sure the rest of the child care is going to get here. But
no, that's completely okay, understandable.
But yeah, I was talking about the
foreign languages.
Yeah, the foreign languages is, with the activity and certain other books, like, I feel it adds a layer of authenticity that is making you really feel like you're in that other country if the foreign language is represented there. And a little bit of the Punisher we just did, there's a moment where really most of the Spanish needs to be translated. That is to say, it needs to be in brackets and written in English for the reader. But we had a couple of introductory phrases, I guess you'd call them, that are in Spanish, because I think it gives you some of that seasoning and gives you a sense of the exoticism or the foreignness of the locale. And so in certain stories, especially where it's important to share with the reader the sense of isolation and the sense of the foreign environment that your lead character is in, I think it adds something to that experience to put some of the foreign language in there. But usually if I put a significant amount, like in the activity, there are moments where there's a lot of various languages, but there's a lot of it in there. It usually means that it doesn't matter, like, the reader doesn't need to know what they're saying. They just need to know that other characters are overhearing that there are people nearby saying something or something like that, or that there are goons who happen to be, whatever, the native speakers of a certain language. So in other words, I don't expect, if I'm using a significant amount of any foreign language, I don't expect for the readers to translate it or need to know what it is,
Do you ever use that as an opportunity to sneak in jokes or cheeky commentary?
I think I have a couple of times, but yeah, I'd have to remember what exactly those things were. But yeah, there are a couple of things. There's also a time or two I got in trouble because, especially if you're rushing and if it's a language that, I don't know, or even if it's one I do, and you might be conversationally fluent, or you might, for example, have a working knowledge of the language in one country, but there are a lot of especially a lot of comic writing is very idiomatic, and a lot of the character stuff is idiomatic. So to really be able to hit those idioms in, what you need is somebody from that country to run over it. And with the activity or other books I'm doing, where I'm trying to put out a number of books a month, and I'm going to 10 different countries. In fiction, you don't always get the time to run it by a native speaker to tell you whether or not, your phrasing was correct or something like that. So there were a couple of times where people reacted and said, that's not how we'd say it in this country, or whatever it may be. And it's like, look, we're running against the clock here, and at the same time, So I hate that. I like to try to get everything as accurate as possible, but we learned our lesson a couple of times with how we approach that.
So, speaking of, a cheekiness there, we have met, and you're a pretty funny guy. I feel like there's a familiar cheekiness in John from Who is Jake Ellis, and at the risk of you, telling me phrasing, bro, do you see yourself in John?
Um, I don't know. I've never thought about that. I've never had anybody talk to me. I mean, I think part of what defines John to me is that he, at least early in the story, he kind of doesn't care. He's very cavalier. He's very, I don't have to worry about it because I got a guardian angel who's going to worry about it for me. And so that sort of, but what does carry forward as he, even in the sequels and stuff, as he gets, as he starts to engage more seriously and realize, that he needs to take some of this stuff seriously. Yeah, some of that cheekiness is still there, and I think that that's just a character trait that continued to carry on. But part of the reason it's there, and part of the reason it's so important, is it's part of the interaction between John and Jake, and seeing the distinction in their personalities is important, and that's one of the ways that we do that.
So if you had your own Jake Ellis to follow you around and look out for your best interests, what kind of things would he warn you not to do, or what kind of helpful hints would he give you?
Oh, I don't even know if I want to go there. All kinds of stuff. I think, hopefully he'd be a bit of a financial advisor too. That would be very helpful. And maybe a gardener. Also, I was trying to do some gardening today, and I hate it, and I'm no good at it. So, somebody's like, you can't plant that there; it'll die. And like, I didn't know. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because Jake, at least early on, is not really much of a moral compass to John. He sits by while John does the worst stuff that he can do. But you maybe get a sense that if Jake were a little more assertive, that he might be a little bit of a moral compass. It's and where we're going forward with the story in the future, you might see some of that come out and play, because as we learn more about Jake, and about his background, as he learns more about himself, some of that's going to come out.
So let's talk a little bit about Genesis, which I actually just got a chance to read and really absolutely loved. And when you were in the shop, we overheard you saying that, it was one title that you wish that more people had read. Is there a specific reason why?
That there was one title, I don't understand. Sorry, there's also some noise going on. That there was one title that I wished more people would have read, or that was one title?
That was one title that you wish that more people had read and more people were aware of, and it gave me the impression that you were specifically endeared to that title.
To Genesis.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people have read it. I mean, it looks like this. We were in the top 15 graphic novels last month. Sales have been good. The response has been extraordinary. I mean, I'm very, very pleased. What I may have, I don't remember saying that exactly. What I might have meant is that I hope more people look at this, and then the Dream Merchant and Olympus and things I've done, to look at some stuff outside. I have a lot of people who follow me with the Black Widow, the Jake Ellis, the Activity, and in that espionage and military vein, and it's not the only area that I enjoy writing, and so what I may have meant is that I hope a lot of people are willing to step outside that box and, among my readership and experience something with a different flavor.
Well, and on that vein, I do have to say that having read Genesis and, eagerly awaiting the next issue of Dream Merchant, I have to agree that, for folks who haven't already stepped outside of your body of work that includes, the spy espionage stuff, I really love both of the titles that you sort of stepped outside of that comfort zone. Both of them are really fantastic. And with Genesis, the tone of the story is really different. The way that the character speaks, he has, it almost has this more like omnipresent feel than a lot of your other narrated works. And can you talk a little bit about your thought process? Because there's definitely a tonal difference. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process in the lead character of that story, and maybe, I guess, his voice? Because it came off very, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. It came off very differently than a lot of the things you've read, because he's looking back on all of the destruction from the end of the story, knowing how things end, and telling it from the beginning, and that definitely changes how things go. Was it difficult to write that kind of character?
Um, honestly, it's one of those things where I started writing it so long ago. It's hard for me to really remember what I went through in the course of that. But it's funny. Earlier on, you mentioned something about stepping outside of my comfort zone, and I don't feel that I did. I mean, I feel very comfortable with that story. That is to say, like it's a space I enjoy being in, and it's the sort of story I enjoy telling. So I think it's more maybe out of the comfort zone for my followers. But I mean, part of that is intentional career direction. That is, I got red hot heat in that spy and espionage area, and just kept trying to, and I'm continuing. I got several more espionage type stories coming up soon. Creator Own and company, work for hire, and so I kept striking the iron in the same place. But as far as understanding and creating a character, I think the process, at least for me, is very similar to putting together a spy or any other kind of story, because you start with the character first and you ask, who is this character and what do they want, what are their goals, and what is stopping them from obtaining their goals, or what do they think their goal is and what do they learn about that goal. So it's understanding what their journey is and what they're up against, and getting to creating a character that you understand well enough that you can just kind of set them to life on the page and then follow them. I think that's, that it's just as difficult. That process is just as difficult for any book. And in fact, in telling a variety of stories in the same genre, it becomes increasingly difficult because there are pitfalls where you're like, well, clearly, for example, a spy or a superhero is, going to need and want ABC, and you end up telling the same character over and over. So the difficulty is like, I'm approaching a new story and I've got a new character, and what makes this character his own person, and how is he completely different? Dancer was such a radically different character than John was or Jake was. That is the Alan character in my book Dancer, because he was a different age, he had a different background. There's a different inciting incident that sort of set the whole story off. So in Genesis, I think I spent more time in the script in the character's head, that is showing what's in his head is on the page. So less of it was like more the action-oriented stuff external to the character, and there's a lot more that at least felt like you were internal, inside the character's head. So I think that from the experience of the audience feels a lot more personal and feels a lot more psychological, but from the experience of telling that story, it's just as personal and just as psychological as creating any of the other characters. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you said something about it not being outside of your comfort zone and rather being, inside of the fans' comfort zone, because, before I started reading a little bit more outside of, your spy espionage work, I sort of thought that was your bread and butter, and it really is. But, Genesis is an incredible book. Dream Merchant is an incredible book, so you're obviously very comfortable in a different, in a different, more psychological space, which is incredible. And I like Genesis.
And I say, too, when I say outside of my comfort zone, I mean no more than any other book. Every book is outside of my comfort zone that I approach. I think if it wasn't, then I'm probably doing something wrong if I don't feel uncomfortable starting a story. But it's just as uncomfortable as anything else. That's probably a better way to put it.
That's an incredible way to look at it as a writer as well. And with Genesis, the story, it has some really powerful themes. And I think a lot of times when a writer writes something, there are certain themes that they don't even realize are being put into a story until someone else reads into it. Are there any themes, or is there one particular theme of the story that was really important to you, that touched you very personally? I like that there's a lot of interpretation that can go into it in terms of, creative, expressing creative ideas, the way that people's thoughts come off versus how they would actually manifest themselves. There's a lot to be said there, and I could see how writing something like that would, especially if you're talking about coming out of your comfort zone when you're writing something, I could see how a lot of the things in a lot of the themes in Genesis can rock a person and affect a person.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about that. And honestly, even if there is something that feels that distinctly personal, I'm not sure I'd talk about it. I mean, everything, sort of, obviously everything I write comes from, it comes from out first. I mean, that is to say, it comes from things I've read and experienced and done, and then I take those and internalize them, and then it comes out and becomes a story. So, at some point, it's all filtered through me and through my soul, or whatever you want to call it. So everything has some personal bias, but yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think through that story a little bit. I think I more often maybe associate myself with the journey of like a spy character or something. That's probably just because I think it I feel like I want to go do something cool, like be a spy. Which obviously is cooler than having the power to manifest anything just by thinking it.
Yeah,
that seems way cooler. Control. It's like, yeah, it's too much. It's like getting every topping when you go to the frozen yogurt place. Like that's not why you go. You go to get like just a couple.
Yeah. Sounds great in theory.
Right.
In theory, just in theory. So let's talk a little bit about The Punisher, because that has actually brightened up the last 2 weeks. I've been sort of, pacing my way through it. And we're up to issue, I'm trying to think. I got issues 1 through 5, and I think another one has come out since I picked them up. Am I correct?
No. 6 has not come out yet.
6 has not come out yet. Okay. Punisher is in LA. Is that what made you a shoo-in to write this comic, or was there a little bit of back and forth between you and Marvel where you expressed interest? How did you writing Punisher come about?
After we started on Black Widow, Marvel kind of, I guess, offered me a list of titles that they wanted to make part of the new next wave of Marvel Now. And there were a few I was interested in, but I just felt like I couldn't turn down Punisher, especially because it would be a #1. And I told them that if I was going to do it, I had to, I said I want to do it with Mitch, the artist I was working on the activity with. I immediately saw this version of the Punisher that he and I, in the way in which he and I would approach it, and I knew that we would do something that would be remembered for, a long time. And so, I sort of made that pitch to them to say, here's how we would approach it, and here's what we do, and here's why I think it would work for a modern audience, like where it would be, a good update for the Punisher. And finally, I sort of made the point of saying, I think this would be a really great vehicle to turn the Punisher into a television series, which doesn't mean that our series is like some pitch or something that we made just to get adapted, but we looked at it and sort of set the stage in a way that we could definitely see this being a series. And anyway, all that was in our head when we started putting the thing together. And yeah.
So your little cameo was hilarious. Whose idea was it? Was it your idea or the artist's idea to insert you into the violence of the Punisher briefly?
Yeah, I didn't actually. Well, I guess I saw it when I got the art. No, I didn't know he was going to put me in there. I had written in something about a Rizzoli and Isles set, but I certainly wouldn't have told him to draw me in it. But it was fun, and the TNT and Rizzoli and Isles and all those people got excited and tweeted, and I went and signed copies for people on the set there. So, hey, anything to sell extra copies and rope in more readership. And Angie Harmon, who's got her chair there, she's a big big Marvel fan, big She-Hulk fan. So you know, it's fun, and there are going to be some other fun cameos, not by me, but we didn't want it to be slapstick about the fact that we're in Hollywood, but I think if you look closely in future issues, you'll see a couple of little fun nods, including to a couple of there's actors. I mean, Punisher's such a recognizable and cool character. There's a couple of actors who have reached out to us about different aspects of the character, and so one who would love to play the character, and I totally support it. I mean, it was actually somebody that I suggested, and then he reached out to me and expressed how excited he would be to play the character. So we'll play around with some of that stuff, but it's sort of background seasoning. We don't want this to be the Punisher tours the stars, gets a star map and tours the stars' homes or anything.
So I really, also another little small thing that you guys threw out, I found it completely adorable that Frank was sporting a Hot Guy shirt. That was pretty awesome. Was that you, the artist, or was it just something that popped up?
No, that was all Mitch.
It was all Mitch? Nice. So one of the great things that I'm really enjoying about your Punisher series is in any team book where the Punisher shows up, the Avengers a lot of characters treat him as though he is a man who has kind of lost his humanity in the search for revenge, and which is not the case. Frank Castle has a lot of very human qualities, and you do a really good job of illustrating those in the story, based on his friendship with, his relationships at the diner, and, him picking up and rescuing the coyote. Talk to us about some of those story choices that you made to make a more relatable Frank Castle, and why is it important that the character, that we still be able to relate to a very dramatic, very violent character?
Well, I mean, you're exactly right, and that was our thought process and our discussion the whole way through, was how do we when we started to approach this book, we said, how do we make this character relatable? How do we get female readership in to read The Punisher? That's historically not been, it's not been a book that has had a whole lot of, female readership, and so that was something we were interested in, and just widening the Punisher's base, because, it's the title that, for a character that not the fault of any writer or any team or anything, but it's sort of shrunken. The fan base has shrunken over the years, just because Frank and the Punisher and the whole idea behind him, I think, carries a lot of the tenets of decades past. So, the trick was, how do we update that without contradicting what Frank really is? And if you sit down, and other writers have done a really good job at times of showing this, but we said, if you really break Frank down and think about who he is, I mean, he is he's a person. He's a functioning. He's not a sociopath. He's a functioning human being with some kind of moral code, and so he has to have human moments. And how do we expose those and explore them, and what sides of those do we see? Because the more human, or the more of those moments we show, the more human he is, and that's going to make him more relatable, open him up. And that's going to bring in readers, because they're going to care about who he is as a person, and not just root for him shooting the bad guys, but actually really get into his head and care. But not just care, we wanted him to be likable. So, it was one of these things where, we had to steer the boat a little bit in a different direction, but not so much that we're not still headed to the same place. So it's just getting there, 1 degree off. So, and one of the thoughts we had early on was to give him, he needed to identify with his new locale, he needed to identify with Los Angeles, and we decided to give him a kind of home base. Now, he doesn't have a home. It's not like he goes back to his 2-bedroom, 2-bath little chalet or something, or his studio apartment in Culver City, but he does have to have a home base where he sort of experiences home, and so that became the Nickel Diner, and it's a place where people don't know who he is. They think he's another B actor who I've seen that guy in something before, because that's what every place you go to in LA, you have that experience. And we built up kind of a supporting cast there of people he interacts with. We even showed some humor, a slight smile, and stuff like this. But it all felt to us like it was still true to Frank. We were just giving him a place where we could actually show some of that. And then bringing in the coyote, I mean, it's funny, people are always talking about Frank's pet, but I'm quick to say it's not Frank's pet. You know, he doesn't have the coyote. I mean, Tugs does. He gave it away pretty quickly. But it was an opportunity to, I guess, one, to show, to draw a comparison between, you know, Frank and this lone coyote, but also to show a little bit, a moment of what Frank does care about, you know, and how he doesn't stand for senseless destruction and senseless loss of life. And we thought that that was a good beat, an important character-defining moment for him.
So we talked a little bit about, you know, the Frank Castle feels, but this book does not skimp on the action either. I mean, it is very much what you would expect out of a Punisher book. What were some of your goals when plotting out the action sequences? What did you envision in your head that's going to set apart this crazy Frank Castle violence from other Punisher stories in the past?
Well, for one thing, we had to, you know, Mitch and I spent a lot of time. I mean, we come from a background where we understand weaponry and military tactics, and have spent time directly and indirectly in that world. And then through the activity and all the research we did and the experiences we had, we were able to bring to the table a lot of, for lack of a better word, expertise. I don't want to call myself an expert, but, you know, a lot of expertise, at least a lot of knowledge. And so we wanted to approach all of Frank's action and all of his engagements and his tactics from a very real place. And that first meant it can't be too big. He's not blowing up buildings, although he does blow up a building. You know, he's not flying through the streets with two heavy machine guns and just, you know, ready. It was a much more precise and thoughtful and realistic approach. And then we said, all right, what happens when that force meets the force of the Marvel U, that is to say, a supervillain? And all of a sudden, we wanted to see those two things clash. You know, something very realistic and something Marvel realistic, and to see those things come together. And to us, that's part of what was going to make our Punisher book so interesting.
So the other thing that I found really interesting about this Punisher book is the, I guess, the tone change for the Howling Commandos. You know, it seems like they have been turned almost into assassins. Where did the decision to sort of change that tone for the Howling Commandos come from? And are we going to find out more about these characters and these new this new attitude for the team?
Well, you know, when you talk about changing tactics and everything, I think we more updated them. If you look at the history of our real Black Ops and Special Ops groups, and especially the British SAS, where they started, because we didn't have any Black Ops groups that started in World War II, but Special Operations did start in World War II, but it was the British SAS, and they started with, you know, something not that far removed from the Howling Commandos of their early appearances in Marvel. And they then sort of disappeared for a long time until the 70s. All of a sudden, people became aware that Britain has this elite counterterrorism Black Ops unit, and they're storming embassies and rescuing hostages, and holy cow, who are these guys and what in the world is going on? And then all of a sudden the world realized countries have these guys. Like, this is a thing, and the U.S. scrambled to, you know, have a competing program, and that's where Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 and all these, you know, things came about. So we, you know, to us it was sort of the same natural evolution that the real special operations groups have seen, and so we just said, they've been here all along. They just became a Black Ops group that nobody hears anything about. They answer directly to the highest levels of government. They're not part of the regular hierarchy of the military, and they're going to show up in our book. And so that's how we approached it. We're like, you know, if they were around today, what would they be doing? And so that's the question we answered. And of course, you still don't know in the book why they're doing or exactly what they're doing, but you have the idea that they're sort of slowly circling Frank Castle for some reason.
Well, I look forward to seeing how Punisher progresses. I won't lie, if you had told me a year ago that Punisher was going to be added to my pull list, I would have been like, all right, but I've really enjoyed this series, and I think it's a really fresh take. So thank you for that.
We
That's
love
what
to
I
hear.
need.
Like, this is obviously we've got female readership on the Punisher, which is very exciting to us. You know, we've got a lot of people who are like reading Black Widow. I'm trying to tell them, go read Punisher. If you're liking Black Widow, go read Punisher. And a lot of people are afraid to take that leap because they think they know what they're going to get with Punisher. But I'm always real excited to hear anybody who has read Punisher for the first time, which is a lot of people.
It's good to defy expectations. It's really important for, especially with, you know, a franchise that's been around forever, to come at it with a fresh take. And not just because women are the largest growing demographic in comic book readership, but on the whole, you know, it's about making good art. It's about making something different and new and original that still holds that attitude. And I think that, you know, you guys have been very successful at doing that with the Punisher. And I won't lie, I was skeptical, but yeah, you proved me wrong, you know? It's great.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely right, and that's how we approach these books at Marvel, um, and that's how Marvel's approaching them too. You know, almost like they're each one's a creator-owned book, and let the chemistry of the team produce something rather than have something dictated to them.
Oh, bless you, Marvel. Speaking of bless you, Marvel, the moment that I won't lie, I've been waiting for. Let's talk about Black Widow. So what was the appeal of writing this character specifically?
Um, Let me, hold on, let me shut this door here. Um,
Oh no.
Child care is here, but happy child she isn't. What was the appeal? Honestly, the appeal initially was working with Phil Noto. I mean, I didn't really get, you know, when they said Black Widow, I was like, okay. I mean, I get why the character's hot. I don't know what I'm going to do to it until they said Phil Noto, and immediately it just clicked. I said, I know how we're going to approach this. I know what we can do. And there were a couple other things that Marvel said the story really just came from us, but Marvel had a few ideas. They said, you know, here's a couple of ways we think that Black Widow will work. You know, for example, they didn't want a book where she just whines about being a female in a world of male superheroes and, you know, how unfair. They're like, I was like, no, we just want her to be awesome. You know, like we want her to be strong and conflicted and to be just as interesting and to be treated just as importantly as we would any other character. And so, you know, no moments of acting as if anybody's treating her less than they would any other character in the Avengers. And so, you know, in other words, if we have that in mind approaching the character, we think that'll translate to the readership, that they'll approach her and not see her as a second-tier, secondary character at all.
And many of the books that you are writing and have written are male-led stories. Does writing a female lead story change your method at all? You talked about like stepping outside of your comfort zone every time you write something. Did her being a female character have, you know, present any different, you know, I guess methods for writing?
I don't think so. You know, the activity had, you know, that was a female. The lead was a female, and there was an ensemble, but the main character was female. And actually, the character I enjoyed writing the most was one of the female characters, and the character I liked the most. You know, at least I'm not aware of like any of approaching the character differently at all, especially not in Black Widow, because I mean, it's very action oriented. I think maybe, you know, maybe in the quiet moments, I feel a little more comfortable with Black Widow as a female character, giving her more of these still introspective and sort of I'm not quite sure how to describe this, but for lack of a better word, precious moments where you really like get close to her and think and like sort of dwell. And like I think that I would approach those moments differently, if it was a male character. Um, like and it's not to say that she needs to be more boring or she needs to do something, but to be honest with you though, I don't think that that's like, it wouldn't be the same for any female character. It's just because it's Black Widow and it's Phil writing her. I mean, Phil drawing her. So when Phil illustrates her, there's something so magical in getting real close in, because you can, in the way he illustrates the character, you feel like you're watching her think. And so I really love those moments. But, and maybe it has something to do with her being a female character that I, sort of am drawn in or want to rush in with the panels and experience those. But I think as much as anything, it's just that Phil is illustrating her. And if he was illustrating another character, I think, for example, Mitch's art, we have these solo moments with the Punisher where we do have these sort of, but he's usually doing something, cleaning a gun or doing sit-ups or something like that, which I think is a little more true to his character. He's not somebody who is going to sit in his own mind and dwell on his own past. But Black Widow does. She's constantly consumed by it. So having these moments where it seems like she's thinking and pondering something, I think is very true to her character. So, maybe there's something in the difference in gender there, but it also, I need to do 10 books, male-led single characters, and 10 books female-led, to see if I really approached, the two differently, or if each character was a little bit different, and led to its own moments. But certainly in preparing for like writing an issue, it's there's no like blanket difference. I mean, there is a natural blanket difference in terms of certain tenets that might come into play, but in terms of story structure and things like that, I mean, just like I said about the characters before, you get into the head of the character, you put them in a series, and you see what they're going to do. And one thing that we certainly haven't done with Black Widow is we haven't toned down any of the action or the violence or anything just because she's a female character. She is engaged 100% and getting beat up just as much. And and so in that sense, like, there certainly isn't a difference. I think she probably, has gotten beat up in the first issues more than Punisher did in his first issues.
So when Marvel name dropped Phil Noto, was there this moment of, I mean, because his artwork is incredible, was there this moment of intimidation, or did that sort of just give way straight into blinding excitement?
It certainly wasn't intimidation. I knew Phil before that, and I'm a fan of Phil as a person, and he's just such a good. Maybe if I didn't know him and didn't know anything about him, I might have felt, like, boy, I don't want to disappoint this guy. But I met him, and I just, I was like, I like him. I want to, I feel comfortable. We can communicate well. Like, we hadn't worked together or anything, but I already knew from the times I met him and spent time with him, talking to him and everything. I just knew how good of a guy he is. And so I immediately felt comfortable with him in terms of a work partner. And as far as his art, I mean, no, when they said it, it just clicked. I said, I immediately see this book. I see how pretty it's going to be, how dynamic it's going to be. I think he's perfect for it. And look, for me, approaching any book, it's all about the artist and that collaboration. And I told Marvel that on some other books we were talking about. I said, they said, are you interested in this? And I've told other companies the same thing, are you interested in this? And I say, it depends on the artist. Like, I've got to see it and feel like I get the character, but I also have to feel like I get the collaborator and I know how to write for them and I know what we're going to, develop together. So Phil, as soon as they said his name, I thought, perfect, that makes sense. I get it, and it's going to be great. So, yeah, no, I couldn't have, I mean, there wasn't a moment of, like, jumping up and down. I do remember where I was at the time when Axel called me, because he'd called me first just about Black Widow, and then he said, I just want you to think about it and think about what you'd think about doing Black Widow. And then he called me back like the next day and said, hey, what do you think about doing this with Phil Noto? And I said, perfect, I'm in, I'm sold. And that completely sold it to me. So, yeah, that was how it went down.
One of my favorite things about your Black Widow story is that, Black Widow hasn't gotten a ton of attention in the past, and so her supporting characters aren't as well known, but you've really done a great job of defining her supporting characters, both her attorney, Yelena Belova. What can we expect to see in the future as far as like growing these characters and Widow's relationship with these characters?
Without tipping our hat too much, some of the villains will come back and be important. So in the first 6 issues, part of our goal was to isolate her as much as possible. The villain she was going to meet, we're going to pass on. We did introduce an ongoing story, but we didn't want to give her much of a supporting cast. Isaiah was a stand-in for, or replaced having 5 other characters, right? We just had him, and a cat. And
the cat. Don't forget the cat.
Yeah, and so for the second 6 issues, because we did not want to give anybody the opportunity to say people are only reading this because Captain America showed up. People are only reading this because, we wanted her to stand on her own for the first arc of the story as much as possible. Now, in the second arc of the story, we already know she's going to run into Daredevil. We know she's going to run into Bucky and Winter Soldier, and there's going to be some other people who come into play over the next 6 issues, because the goal of the first 6 was showing how isolated she is, and the goal of the second 6 is to explore how meaningful a lot of the connections that she does have are, and how she might, in this struggle she's got going on, how she might need somebody to lean on, so to speak. And so we're showing some of those other characters, but we purposely waited to introduce some other people into her world, and at least in our series, until after the first arc. So with your experiences on the show, where Rosalia Niles and Chip, of course, there's been a huge fan movement for the Marvel movie universe to see a Black Widow movie come to life. And for those of you who are out there watching and you haven't seen it yet, we just did an episode, 7 Reasons Why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is ready for a Black Widow movie, and some of the cool things that could come from that. With your unique experience, being a writer but also an actor, is there anything that you would really like to see from a Black Widow movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It's interesting. I've seen similar list of, all 7 reasons why we need a Black Widow movie, or, whatever it may be. And I think, there's another list of 7 reasons why, there may not be or there won't be a Black Widow movie, at least anytime soon. But regardless of how that works out, and I'm not going to, I've been privy to a couple of conversations, and I'm not going to say too much one way or the other, but I can say that I am thankful and grateful and excited for what they're doing with her now. She is such an important part of all of the, the majority of the Marvel movies, and I like that is the case, and I look forward to her continuing to cross movie to movie and making all those connections and being a key player, which I hope is what continues to happen. But as far as, seeing... she plays a very important role as sort of a character that holds a lot of the rest of the Avengers together in the cinematic universe, and she's a go-between in a lot of the different films, and that's something that they really need beyond the simple cameos they have, and I think she's great, and it makes sense for her to be that character who is slipping, between the different stories. I don't know what I'd like to see them do differently with her. I think it would be interesting to see her engaged in a little more personal conflict and stuff. But what I would like is for Black Widow to continue doing what she's doing in the Avengers films, and then I would like them to introduce another female-driven franchise or arm of the franchise. Keep Black Widow going and bring in someone else, bring in, a Captain Marvel or somebody like that, and see, what they can do with that, because I don't see, I don't see a reason not to add another big female player to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And obviously, Agent Carter, the TV series, will add something to that whole world. But in terms of the cinematic world, I'm hoping that that comes in a big way from a new character, and that, you know, while maintaining Black Widow and what she's doing. That's what I'd like to see.
Well, and I'm glad that you bring up another, you know, series of female characters, because Black Widow in the comics has a lot of really great personal relationships with a lot of fantastic characters. And, you know, thinking into the maybe even far distant future of the Black Widow storylines, are there any of those friendships with, like, you know, Captain Marvel, with Spider-Woman, any of those relationships that you would like to have the opportunity to explore in your Black Widow title?
Yeah, and I can tell you that we will be. We have some of that planned out, so I'm sure in solicitations pretty soon we will let on to some of what we have planned. So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we introduced the Tori Raven character, who was, I'm a big fan of. I really enjoy putting her into the series because she shows in a way that no male character could. She helps to really distinguish certain aspects of Black Widow's journey, and you really see kind of an inverted reflection in the Raven to what Black Widow is, and so, you know, but that's my point being, that's just one way in which Black Widow becomes more interesting with the introduction of other female characters. Obviously, we're getting a lot of fan reaction and a lot of, like, you know, positive response to the scenes between Natasha and Maria Hill, and I think that's an important relationship we're going to continue to explore, and especially because you get the sense that Maria needs Natasha as much as Natasha, you know, needs Maria and Shield, and so I think that's very interesting. But yeah, we'll continue to throw in some other players there that you know, for various reasons.
So are there any upcoming projects that you have, you know, that you're really excited about, that you want to tell our viewers about and get them pumped up for?
Yeah, well, I've got, like, this, you know, Marvel, Mike Perkins and I are doing this short story that's part of Original Sin with Deathlock, which is a lot of fun, and I've got the Splinter Cell Echoes story coming out from Dynamite. And soon we'll be talking about some creator-owned things as we wrap up some of the current creator-owned things I've got out, and you just have to stay tuned for all of that. But in the meantime, you know, we're ongoing with Black Widow and Punisher, and yeah, that's about all I can really talk about. If you follow me on, wait, oh, here we go, Twitter. I forget that the video is inverted. If you follow me on Twitter, you know, you'll hear it before anybody else. Of course, you'll have to deal with a lot of other stuff that I tweet to get there, but it's worth it, maybe.
Well, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day and away from your toddler to talk to us about some of our favorite titles. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Oh, and before I forget, because I just saw it when I backed up, a shout out to Zach Levi and Shekinah, who are right now working very hard to put together Nerd HQ for San Diego this year. So I'm wearing this shirt as a I don't even know what to say. Anyway, it's in support of all their hard work putting together what is always a really fantastic time that everybody should support. It's so exciting, I completely lose control of diction. But yeah, so you guys go follow them and find out what they're doing with Nerd HQ if you aren't aware.
Absolutely.
This is thank you for Nathan Nerd German. It's Spanish. It's a cool shirt. They sell it in their store. All right, my pleasure. I heard what you were saying. My pleasure, and glad to be here. And I'll see you guys on Twitter and such.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Have a good one.
You too.